Hello, I'm Sylvia Halford, and I would like to tell you about a timeline I made of the chosen people. We're starting right here at the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Here's Adam and Eve in a beautiful garden that God made for them. He made 7 days for their week, 7 colors of the rainbow, from which all colors are made in the universe, 7 notes for every song, and 7 basic sounds from which all languages are created. Life was beautiful in the garden until they sinned and had to leave. God did bless them, though, with children. Their first son, Cain, disappointed them greatly and brought sorrow into the world again after they had sinned by killing his brother Abel. However, they had a son named Seth, who was a righteous man, and he is the beginning of this pathway of righteous people who are called the chosen people. After Seth came Enoch, who walked with God, Methuselah, who was the oldest man, and at that time there were giants in the land, and the wickedness of the world had increased so greatly that God was sorry he had created it and decided to destroy it, but save one man and his family, and that was Noah, who was a just man. He built his ark and took representatives of all the animals in with him, and they were in the ark while God cleansed the earth. After they came from out of the ark, the earth was fresh, and they started again. There was one man of his 3 sons who was the one that was chosen as the righteous man to continue on the seed of the chosen people. Shem had a school for those who wanted to learn of his brothers and sisters and cousins and relatives who were populating the earth at that time. He taught them there about the history preceding them from the garden and all the things they had learned about the Creator, the history of what had happened during the time they fell and were expelled from the garden, about the giants and about the flood, and all the knowledge that man had accumulated and taken on the ark with them. Shem was the father of the Shemites, or the Semites, we call them today. These were the Hebrew speakers. It wasn't exactly Hebrew language. It was more like what you would call the language of Eden, or some people call it Edenics. Everyone in the world spoke Edenics. At one point, the wickedness of the earth became great again, and up here you can see how they started out with one God, moved to polytheism, then monotheism, then polytheism again, and much wickedness associated with that. A man named Nimrod decided to build a tower to make his name famous in the earth, but God had in mind that a different man would be famous in the earth, and his name was Abraham. So God scrambled the languages at the Tower of Babel by some kind of brain disturbance, which devolved the Edenics into 70 languages: Slavonic, Hellenic, Germanic, Sanskrit, and Romantic, and many other languages. From that group of people, where there was a scattering, there was one group that retained the original language, or close to it, and that was the Hebrew people. The first Hebrew was Abraham, and he's famous all over the world, and we sing the song, Father Abraham had many sons, and one of his sons was Isaac. Isaac was the son of promise. From Isaac came Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Joseph, and Benjamin. Of his 12 sons, the 2 main sons that are noteworthy in the rest of the history of this family, which is called Israel — Jacob's name was changed to Israel — the 2 main sons were Judah, who would become the ruling tribe, and they were given the right and responsibility of guarding the words of God as they were put down later. We have just a picture of that. That's the Torah. They have done a good job because these are the Jewish people from the Judah tribe, descended what we know now as modern-day Jews. The other tribe that was very significant and very, very crucial, even in this day and age, is Joseph. Joseph had two sons named Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph did not inherit the name of a tribe, or no tribe was named Joseph, but in fact he got a double blessing by having two sons whose names were tribal chieftains. And so now instead of 12 sons, 12 tribes, we have 13 tribes. 70 members of this family went and lived in Egypt at one point in history, and we know the story of the deliverer of them once they became slaves, and that was Moses. Moses was led by God to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt, not just to be wandering in the wilderness wherever they wanted, but to go to Mount Sinai to receive instructions on how to live and how to be servants of God instead of slaves to the Pharaoh in Egypt. Moses went up the mountain, received the 10 Commandments, and this mandate was given to them. Keep Torah, civilize the world, be a model nation. And they agreed. All the words which the Almighty has said we will do. That has been their destiny, is to take these words of Torah to the world, to civilize the world and help mankind. This picture shows all the different sons' tribal emblems. Each tribe gathered around the tabernacle where God dwelt. He said, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them," and his glory rested upon it. After 40 years in the wilderness, the children of Israel entered the promised land, which had been foretold to Abraham that they would receive. Interestingly enough, the beginning of this, what if you could call it a religion of Abraham, if you can scoot down here again, one of the most important things that God promised Abraham, in addition to being a great nation and that all families on earth would be blessed, his descendants like stars and sand, but that he would be giving them a land, and this is the land of Israel. It's larger than we know it today, but this was the land, the size of its promise. As they entered into this land, they kept the Torah, and God was their king. And sometimes they veered away from that and had problems, and when they obeyed, there was peace. Eventually, they complained to one of their judges, Samuel, that they wanted a king like the other tribes around them, and he said, okay, he gave them a king, and that was Saul. Saul did some good things, but he also fell down on the job as well. Then God gave them a righteous king, and from this king David was to come a dynasty that would be forever, and then David's son Solomon, who built the temple, and the glory of the Lord descended there. After a while, Solomon married foreign wives, and they brought in idolatry, and God warned him that he would lose the kingdom, and in fact he did. After his death, his son Rehoboam continued on in his father's ways, and the kingdom, sadly, was divided. This is a horrible time in the history, and yet God had a plan in mind. A man named Jeroboam became the king up in the northern part of Israel, and in fact his whole area was so huge that it was called Israel. The southern part, where the temple was and where the descendants of David reigned, was called Judah, and that was because it was the main key tribe there was Judah, or what we know as the Jews, as well as Benjamin. Some of the Levites who lived in the northern area were disgusted with the idolatry, and they moved down and became part of Judah as well. So that's why we have some Levite people among the Jews. I'll just show you quickly here. Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler, but the birthright was Joseph's. So down in the south, we have the chief ruler, Judah, and in the north, we have Joseph's tribes. This is called Joseph occasionally, and sometimes is called by his main son, Ephraim. Even to this day, these people are called Ephraim. They were idolatrous, as shown by the timeline, the shaded in part as the righteous kings, and these are wicked. Eventually, the Assyrians came and carried these people off in stages over to the Caucasus Mountain area. Some of them, however, were taken by Palestinian and Phoenician ships to Spain, and then on up to British Isles and on to Scandinavia, and they worked in mines up there. But the bulk were taken over to Media, to cities of Habor and Hala, as it's told about in 2 Kings 7:5-7. Eventually, they overcame their enemies and escaped through the Caucasus Mountains and into Western Europe, and from there they migrated westward and northward to the Western, what we know of as Western democracies. Meanwhile, down in the south, the kingdom of Judah was also becoming sinful, and eventually we see the little Hebrew man who we are following along on both the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. They go into captivity in Iraq or Babylon. The temple is destroyed, and there's great sorrow among those who are righteous, but everybody goes. While they're there, they have to think of another way to hold their people together because they no longer have the temple and the priesthood, so they become very academic, as Jews are today, and established the beginning of rabbinic Judaism and collected the works, oral works that they had passed on down to each other through the Talmud, what later became known as the Talmud. After 70 years, they returned. Many of them did. Many did stay here, but those that returned back to the land recovenanted with God to obey Torah. They did mix it with some paganism that they had collected here in Babylon, however, but they recovenanted under Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, and this is called the Second Temple period. The end of the Second Temple period is famous for when Jesus came on the scene. We have, after he was gone, the temple was burned, and these people sadly were scattered throughout the whole world. God told them that would happen if they didn't obey him. Meanwhile, and this part is more familiar to us, they're expelled from Spain in the Spanish Inquisitions. They are scattered to the Americas, to Europe, uprisings in Ukraine, and so on. There is a highlight here, however, when the light is starting to dawn for the Jewish people, when Eliezer ben Yehuda revives Hebrew as the spoken language. And then Theodor Herzl becomes the father of modern Zionism and the beginning of the return of both the language and the people to the former state where God had promised Abraham would be a land for his people to live. Meanwhile, in the northern kingdom, where did they go? Well, they had continued their migration across, following, we can trace dolmens and such across Europe to see where they went. The different tribes went to different areas, mainly. Reuben is found among the French. Simeon was scattered along with the Jews. Issachar, many of them went to Switzerland and Finland. Zebulun became the Dutch, and the tribe of Dan became the Danes. Naphtali, the Norwegians. Gad became the Swedes. Gad's son is what the Swedish are named after. Asher goes to Ireland. Manasseh becomes dominant in the United States. Ephraim becomes a commonwealth of nations, the British Commonwealth countries. At this point in history, in 1948, when the state of Israel was reestablished and the Jews returned, the Jews were becoming the Jews were returning to the land as foretold by the prophets. And what they were doing, whether they realized it or not, some of them did, they were preparing the infrastructure for all the 12 tribes to return. And we have an interesting thing happening in the north. The northern kingdoms, even though they didn't know who they were, that was part of their judgment for their idolatry, was to be anonymous to themselves. They lost their identity, but now they are starting to return. And here you see, you are here, and the Jews, you are here. The two are merging together, and this is where we currently are in history right now, where we have the Joes and the Jews, the Joseph tribes and the tribe of Judah, and those tribes that are associated with Judah mixing together. And we have a lot of Jewish Joseph people or Ephraimites asking Jews to teach them to understand the Hebrew Bible from a Hebrew perspective. The Valley of the Dry Bones is a key vision that Ezekiel had, in which he saw these northern kingdoms rising from the dead, as it were. These bones are the whole house of Israel. We know the little song, the ankle bone connected to the shin bone connected to the knee bone. That's what that is about. The second part of his vision is where he is to take two sticks, Judah and Joseph, and put them together, and God will unite the northern kingdom and the southern together in the land. The Messiah will call all 12 tribes together. There will be a massive movement back to the land of these lost 10 tribes, and God himself will descend on the Mount of Olives right across from the temple. There'll be a great shakeup in the world. We are not to fear. We are to continue drawing near to God even while he disciplines the nations and his people, purging and purifying them. The kingdom will be set up on God's holy hill of Zion. His king will be established there, and God's glory will re-enter through the eastern gate as it left in Ezekiel 39. God says, "Speak comfortably to Jerusalem, that her warfare is accomplished and her iniquity is pardoned. She has received of the Lord double for her sins." And we're moving towards peace on earth as all nations recognize Israel and start coming to the holy temple, which is rebuilt. They stream there to worship the God of Israel. "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. No one will be excluded. Gentiles, mixed offspring of these tribes, will be welcome to worship the God of Israel. And God will remember the land. There'll be cleansing of the land, and the agriculture will flourish, as we see happening now in the land of Israel." It looks like a resurrection here. "Thy dead men shall live. Awake and sing, ye that dwell in the dust, and the earth shall cast out the dead." The first returnees to occupy Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, and also Samaria, north of Jerusalem and West Bank, will be from the northern and the southern kingdom. And then all together, people will worship the God of Israel. All the nations of the world will recognize who Israel is, and they will understand Israel's history and role and how easy her constitutional law really is. The whole world will be governed through this constitution, which we find in the Torah, and Jerusalem will be the eternal capital of the world, the hub of the world, with universities and colleges, research centers for science and medicine, technology, electronics, agriculture, arts, astronomy, music, physics, languages, etc. And the world will be governed using these 10 commandments that we all know of, that God has given as the code of conduct for mankind that will bring total peace on earth. The Torah will go forth from Zion and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. There'll be peace on earth. God will be king over all the earth, and his name one. And all will love and fear the God of Israel in a Torah society. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and learn war no more, and there'll be peace on earth, and we end up with a garden